Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. Thank you for joining us on this long-awaited IFSO IFSO MENAC debate. It's been quite some time since we've met with you all. Looking forward to seeing you all in person. COVID has changed the dynamics of things. My name is Hazem. I'll be hosting this debate alongside my dear colleague, Dr. Ashraf Haddad. I'm based in Abu Dhabi, and Ashraf will be joining us from Amman, Jordan. Today's debate promises to be an interesting one. We've got two fantastic speakers. One of them, unfortunately, has got caught up in surgery, which we'll hope he'll be joining us quite shortly. Each will be presenting their case to trying to convince us that in the cases of the one anastomosis gastric bypass, should the BP limb be a fixed length or be a fixed ratio? I'm very excited to start this debate shortly, and even more excited having been joined by such an experienced panel. We've got all the way from Italy, Dr. Cipata. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Cipata, and it's a pleasure to meet you. From the United Kingdom, we've got Dr. Mahawar. It goes without telling for the both of them, they've published extensively about the one anastomosis gastric bypass. We've got our IFSO MENAC president, Dr. Khalid Mirza, joining us from Saudi Arabia, and Dr. Haytham Fawal from Beirut. We do apologize in advance for the late delay. Without further delays, I'll hand over the mic to my colleague, Dr. Ashraf. But before starting, I would also like to thank our sponsor, EasySurge, for their contribution to making this webinar a success. Over to you, Ashraf.
Thank you, Hazem. So basically, the debate is going to have 3 questions, and each of our surgeons, Imad and Muhammad, are going to defend their approach to the one anastomosis gastric bypass. The first question is going to be led by Dr. Hazem Al-Momani. He's going to lead the discussion, and we're going to start with Dr. Imad. Basically, total small bowel measurement and bypassing a fixed ratio is a must in OAGB. That's what Imad is gonna argue for. Imad?
How are you, Hazem? Really, it's my pleasure to join the debate webinar, and let me extend a warm welcome to all the audience. I thank them that they waited for us, and I hope they gain a lot of benefit and experience, especially from the panelists and from this debate. So should I start with the first question?
Before starting, Dr. Imad, we would like to ask our audience to take part in this poll. So we'll put the questions up. So to all of you attending this webinar, when performing the one anastomosis gastric bypass, would you guys consider using the fixed length BP or a fixed ratio BP limb? Or do you not perform the one anastomosis gastric bypass in the first place?
It's not selecting, Hazem.
We can't, as panelists, to choose Dr. Haytham, only the audience.
Okay.
Can we have the results, please? Right. Well, it seems that a third of people would go for a fixed length. The fixed ratio is not the most popular of questions. So without further delay, Dr. Imad, would you like to explain to us your logic and how would you usually perform your one anastomosis gastric bypass?
Okay, sure. So can I have the control? Okay, that's okay. So rapidly, because I have a lot of slides, let me go to the literature. Then I will explain why I'm doing this. This is a very interesting narrative review, Dr. Mario Musella and his colleagues. And let me go to this paragraph. He's telling us that the main surgical maneuver in order to avoid malnutrition is to know and measure the total small bowel length and adjust both the biliopancreatic limb and the common limbs to the features of the patient to maintain a reasonable common limb capable of maintaining a long-term weight loss but without malnutrition. And this is a very interesting survey, and we in this webinar we will have a lot of publications from Dr. Kamal. He actually did a very good research work in this area. He did a survey on more than 200 surgeons, and he found that 35% of these surgeons using a constant biliopancreatic limb length for their patient, with the remaining surgeon, which is 65%, they use the biliopancreatic limb tailored to the patient characteristics. And about half of these 65% are routinely measuring the entire small bowel length. And this is another IFSO consensus statement by Dr. Ramos, Dr. Kamal, and others. And they did a survey between
Hello.
these,
Hello.
So you can hear me?
Ahmed. Hi. How are you? I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly
Okay,
sorry.
Mohammed. I'm replying the first question, Mohammed.
Okay.
And then we'll turn welcome. Okay.
I have to say I'm terribly sorry for being late. Hi Ashraf. Hi Kamal. Hi Ahmed.
Mohammed, hi. We're actually online. We started. So
Okay.
When Ahmed finishes the first part, you'll take over.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. This is a very interesting consensus statement in 2020, and they found that about 80% of the surgeon they measure the total small bowel length, and they think that measurement of the total small bowel length can be used to define a percentage for the length of the biliopancreatic limb. About 80%, and interestingly, 93% of these surgeons they agreed that weight loss and metabolic outcome achieved with OAGB can be linked to the length of the bypassed small bowel. And about 62% agreed that total small bowel length should be measured for a safe and adequate OAGB whenever possible without adding risk to the patient. And this is a very important point. If you can make a total bowel length without iatrogenic perforation, without complication, so why not you don't do it? And as we will see in a few minutes, 4 to 5 minutes, you can do it with an extra 2 trukers, small 5mm trukers. So I will defend myself that first, small bowel length is widely variable, and it's not definitely related to certain factors. As we see in the literature, this is an article from Egypt by Dr. Bekhit, and he found that the small bowel in his study on non-bariatric patients, he counted the whole small bowel length in hundreds of patients, and he found that it's ranging from 2.5 meters to 13 meters. So it's very variable. And he didn't find a significant correlation with either the age or the BMI. And this is another article from India. They found that the average mean length of the small bowel was about 7.5 meters, and it wasn't related to the height or weight or age. It was only related to the level of hemoglobin A1C and a high random blood sugar. And another interesting article by Dr. Lee, it's a recent article about 2 years ago, and he found a very variable bowel length from 4 to 11 meters. And he actually measured the whole bowel length in a large cohort of patients. And I will talk about this paper again. And the second explanation for me that it has the same, if you measure the whole small bowel without any added risk to the patient, it has the same or better weight loss, and it has a less nutritional complication related to the fixed biliopancreatic limb when you do it, as I call it, blind. And when you go to the literature, you will find a lot of articles. I can categorize the article into articles talking about comparing cohorts with fixed biliopancreatic limb versus tailored ratio. Like our publication just about half a year ago in the surgical endoscopy, and we studied 2 groups, about 80
1 minute
patients. Okay, I'm about to finish. About 80 patients divided in two groups, a group with 2 meters and a group with tailored measurement of one third of the small bowel. We did the long pouch gastrostomy from 3 to 3.5 to 4.5, and we counted one third the whole small bowel, and we bypassed 1/3, but guided that the efferent limb shouldn't be less than 4 meters. And let me highlight on this that the common limb shouldn't be less than 4 meters. This makes this procedure more safe. You have all your patients at least have a 4 or more common 4 meters common limb length. And this is our technique. I fire from the epigastric port, the first firing, long narrow pouch. I placate the residual. After 2.5 meters, my assistant will hold the small bowel and will complete the counting. I use 2 extra 5mm ports. In the beginning experience, I didn't use these 2 5mm ports, but actually adding 2 5mm port is cosmetically accepted, and you put it lower down in the mid-clavicular line, and it make it very simple. You just count the whole small bowel easily in about 4 to 5 minutes. And this is the final shape of our plicated pouch and functional end-to-side gastrostomy. We find that the tailored group had a better weight loss, and they have less hypoalbuminemia, but similar mineral and vitamins levels. So let me skip this slide. And this is another article from Italy. They compared fixed 2 meter versus 40% bypass of the total small bowel. After counting the whole total small bowel, they have a similar weight loss, but they have higher nutritional complications in the fixed group, as you see in the black columns. And this is the last slide for me in the first question.
Thank you, Imad. Now, I hope Dr. Mohammed Abu Zaid is with us from Egypt to answer his part of the question. Mohammed?
Hi, how are you? Can you see me and hear me, please? All right.
Yes, we can, Mohammed.
Manuela, can I have my slides? Yes. I'm really sorry for being late, and I'll start. Actually, my slides are short, so I think we can catch up our time. Manuela, can you put my slides, please?
Yes, Mohammed, you have them. You can just move on.
Okay. I'm trying. 1 second. I can see my slides. Okay. Where are the slides? Can you see the slides? Maybe this. Okay. Okay, right now. Okay, now I can see the slides. Okay, so as you know that we started to make the one anastomosis gastric bypass like 12 years ago around the world. I know that Rutledge started before, but I mean that it started to take upper hand in bariatric surgery, not the upper hand, big upper hand, but it started to grow in the bariatric surgery like 12 years ago. Okay, 1 second. Okay, I have to move this. Okay, so when we started it, our experience was a bit different than right now. Okay. From 2011 till now, we performed like 3,500 cases together with my partners. From these, I follow up like 1,500 of these cases. Those who follow up actually from the 1,500 are few, but I mean that I followed them in the early post-operative or the late post-operative or with their complications. I know that you know about our paper that we published in 2016, and I had some modifications on my technique after the 2016 because we started with the Rutledge technique, wide pouch anastomosis, 60 millimeters, 6 centimeters anastomosis. Don't worry about anything, and everything is fine. And by time we discovered that one anastomosis gastric bypass, or MGB, has to be modified. We need a long, narrow pouch. We need a small anastomosis. We need a good anastomosis. We need very, very meticulous anastomosis, not to have any kink or twist. Okay, so in this journey, did we try to count the whole length of the bowel? Yes. At times, we try to use this technique. We found out that I will pass by this slide before I complete my paper. Ashraf Haddad had a great work with us to have a survey in 2019 to discuss with the surgeons who do the one anastomosis and what technique do they use. And in our survey, only 10% of surgeons did 1/3 of the total bowel length technique. So I think that the 90% of surgeons who didn't do the whole length counting either were having fear of bowel injury, or they were not convinced by counting the whole bowel length. Okay, so during our modifications of the technique, we tried to count the whole length of the bowel. We found out that it takes time. Sometimes you have serosal tear of the bowel. We didn't have a definite case of bowel injury in these patients who were counted, but still we had a case of bowel injury with one of our colleagues during counting the intestine. So counting the intestine has risk of perforating the bowel, even if it's 1 in the 1,000. We are trying to be a safe surgeons, and trying to be a safe surgeons, they say that we do only what we need to do in the operation. If we need to count the whole intestine, we have to be justified why we are counting in every patient the whole intestine. Okay, let's proceed to the next.
1 minute left.
Okay, so proceeding to the next area. If we put more length to the bowel, would this be great for the patient? No, because in our paper in 2016, we used to tailor our limb according to the BMI from 150 to up to 3 meters of the intestine. Okay, and we had 100% excess weight loss in some of these patients. When we revised our technique and I started to make 180 centimeters for all the patients and 150 centimeters for the BMI 35, like in the diabetic patients with low BMI like 35. And in super obese, when I used the 2 meters only, we didn't have any kind of nutritional problem that we had with the other patients. And still, we had very, very good weight loss outcome. And in the same time, we didn't face any problem with these kind of patients in the last 4 years regarding the severe diarrhea, which was problematic for some patients, regarding the severe malnutrition and liver affection. Okay, I'll finish here and I'll complete with in the second question.
Thank you, Muhammad. So let's ask the question again to the audience, and meanwhile we would like to hear what the panelists have to say. When performing OAGB, okay, again, do you use a fixed length, fixed ratio? I don't have a preference. I don't perform OAGB. And while we do this, I'm just gonna ask our panelists. We would like to start with Dr. Chiappetta. You have published about the OAGB as a revisional procedure and compared it to the Roux-Y gastric bypass. In your experience, or what's your personal approach and why? Do you use a fixed length, or do you measure the total small bowel length? Is Dr. Chiappetta with us?
Here I am. In my study, which I have published 3 years ago, we used a fixed biliopancreatic limb length of 200 centimeters. I have to say, at this time, I worked with Rudolf Weiner, and in our hospital, we used limb length from 150 centimeters to 200 centimeters. But in the redo cases, we perform 200 centimeters. And I have to say, comparing it to Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, we had a better weight loss of MGB after sleeve gastrectomy and the second step procedure with 200 centimeters, but I didn't analyze the malnutrition. So I think it's really important in redo cases, that's my personal opinion, but in redo cases to use a fixed ratio or to measure the whole bowel length. In primary surgery, I have to say I use a fixed length, but in redo surgery, yeah, we have to pay attention.
Excellent. And for primary, what is your fixed length? Are you more conservative? You go 150, 180, you do longer limbs?
So I use 180 centimeters as a standard fixed length. And in patients with a BMI from 35 to 40, patients with diabetes and so on, I use 150 centimeters. BMI over 50, 55 with important visceral fat, I use 200 centimeters, but 200 centimeters is the cutoff. I never use more than 200 centimeters.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Dr. Mahawar, you have reported in a survey that you led that 150 almost gives zero malnutrition rate. And I would like to hear your thoughts regarding both approaches and what do you do or what do you offer your patients?
Yeah, thank you, Ashwin. First of all, my huge thanks to IFSO and organizers and you all for asking me to come here and join you today. So coming to this topic, obviously, you know, limb length and gastric bypass is an interesting and controversial topic. It's been going on forever. My personal take is that in that survey, and we've seen that from other data as well, that the nutritional complication rates with one anastomosis gastric bypass seems to be linked to the length of the BP limb that we're using. And historically, OAGB was introduced by Rutledge and colleagues with a BP limb of 180 to 200 centimeters. And we know that even in Rutledge's own series, that had a 1% malnutrition rate requiring further surgery because that requiring reversal. Same rates were replicated by Lee as well. And these were both retrospective studies, which we know suffer from poor follow-ups. So my personal bias is that even with 180 centimeters, the malnutrition rates were possibly higher than 1% than that was reported. So on the back of that data and many other data sets, we now recommend a 150 centimeters standard BP limb for all OAGB patients, primary as well as secondary. I think it will not make the malnutrition rates zero. I think it will reduce it substantially. And in the future, I think we should even study lower limb lengths because BP limb is 50 centimeters with Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, generally 50 to 100 centimeters. And that does not give a much inferior outcome to OAGB. So my personal bias is that, you know, increasing the BP limb beyond 100 centimeters does not really improve the outcomes of a gastric bypass much at all. That's my feeling.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Mahawar. Dr. Haitham Fawal, you were one of the leaders of OAGB in our Middle East region. Both the IFSO MENAC OAGB survey and the IFSO Worldwide OAGB survey told us that 2/3 of the surgeons don't measure the total small bowel length. What do you do? Do you think it's a must?
Well, actually, I did the total bowel length measurement only in revisional cases. I think our main problem, our main concern in anastomosis gastric bypass is to have a safe procedure. It is not the problem of weight loss. So we know that adding a malabsorption will lead us to more malnutrition and probably liver failure. And you know our publication from the MENA region where we have like 3 or 4 cases of liver failure. So the more you go distal, the more you have problems. It is not our problem now, is not the weight loss. So I would second Dr. Chiapetta and Dr. Kamal Mahawar in having a fixed less than 2 meters small bowel BP limb, and wait for probably prospective randomized control trial to decide whether we should go more distal. I do only the 1/3 to 2/3 for revisional cases, and this is where I do the total bowel measurement. And we know all of us, or most of us, are working in university setup. So having teaching our residents to do the total bowel length measurement is something really not easy to do, and it carries a high risk of perforation, probably in the hands of Imad or Hazem, or the experienced surgeon will have a less complications, but it's not easy at all. And since we're having, as Kamal mentioned in his study, an outcome that is almost equal to the 1/3 to 2/3 or more than 2 meters, so why to bother? Why to go for a more complicated procedures if we have a simple one? One of the success of our bariatric procedures is to have a reproducible procedure. We know, for example, that duodenal switch is one of the best surgeries in terms of result, but it is not the first in terms of bariatric preference. So I think making the one anastomosis reproducible, I think measuring the total small bowel or 1/3 to 2/3 makes it more complicated.
Thank you, Haitham. Dr. Khalid Mirza, our IFSO MENAC president, do you perform OAGB? What approach do you use and why?
First of all, I just give you my background. I am malabsorptive bariatric surgeon. I started with the biliary divergent Scopinaro technique. I have done more than 2,500 cases in Saudi Arabia since 2003. Then I shifted to single anastomosis gastric bypass. Why? It is a malabsorptive. It gives me the same outcome like BBD, but with this far less metabolic complication. I have follow up more than 10, 15 years of BBD now I'm seeing it. So it gives me the same outcome and the weight loss, but far less complication in the metabolic. So as everybody, I started 2009, I moved from BBD to single anastomosis gastric bypass in 2009. And we have to consider something. Culture is different in this area, behavior is different, so we have to consider this. Male is different than female here in our country. All these factors play a major role in the outcome. So when we started 2009, I started with the same 200, then standard limb 200. After we learning care, we find our patient and outcomes, then we change according, we tailor the length. So in metabolic bariatric procedure, I use 150, while the pouch is the same. And from 40 to 50, we go female is different than male with by 10 centimeter. For female, 160 or 160 to 65. In the male, the same BMI, the same age, I go a little bit furthermore, 5 to 10 centimeters, so 170. We never go beyond 200. In the opposite way, we came down to 180 because of late metabolic complication. For revisional surgery, sometimes most of the revisional surgery from sleeve, almost 1/3 of my cases, sleeve to single anastomosis gastric bypass. So I go there to 180. We don't measure the whole bowel because of weight regain. But measuring the whole bowel, as I said, only 1 or 2 cases when there is a huge inadequate weight loss or so much BMI high. So we measure this bowel and we go 2/3 and 1/3 only in very special cases. But as I said in summary, I don't go beyond 200. Most of the cases 180, revisional case to 200, and a range based on 6 and the BMI, male and female, and the primary BMI.
Excellent, thank you, Dr. Mirza. So my understanding from all panelists is that you are more cautious now. You don't offer 2 meters. Most people are offering 180, 150 for primary, and then you go a little bit more and maybe use a fixed ratio for revisions. And it seems that this is a hybrid approach between our two debaters. Before we move to the next questions, Hazem, do we have any questions from the floor, and would you like to add anything?
Hi, guys. We've got no questions from the floor, but I've got a question myself to Dr. Imad. Dr. Imad, thank you for sharing your experience with us. If I may ask, please, how do you justify the risks that the panelists have just spoken about? We've got with us quite experienced surgeons, and they all seem to be quite reluctant to offer fixed ratio for primary, and what is it that you talk about with your patients when you consent them?
Okay, Hazem, let me talk in two pathways. First pathway, measuring the small bowel, if you do it in a proper way, is not risky, and we didn't have any single case of bowel injury. First of all, you have to prepare your patient well. You have to, and you have to have it as a fixed part of your program. The patient should go through a very low calorie diet for at least 2 weeks. I know that this is different in our population, but you have to be strict to this. So you don't have a very, how you call it, very loaded mesentery. Second, you have to put 2 extra 5mm trukers lower down, because counting the distal small bowel from the higher up trukers, actually what made it difficult and what exposed you to complications. It takes only 4 to 5 minutes if you use these 2 extra 5mm truker, and I think 2mm truker is not a big issue. The second, that I think that if you bypass a fixed lens, you are doing the operation in a blind way. I'm not meaning the actual meaning, but I mean, what will you do if your patient is bowel length is about 4.5 meters or 5 meters, as we see in the literature, and as we see with some of our patients? So you have to go a little bit with shorter BP limb. Sometimes I did a BP limb with 1 meter and 30 centimeters. So bypassing a tailored part of the small bowel guided by the total length doesn't mean that you have to do more than 2 meters. It means that you have to be aware about the total length of the patient, and sometimes you can go even lower than 1.5 meters. Dr. Kemal said in his last publication that even 1.5 meter is not very safe. So it's not difficult, it's not harmful. Just prepare your patient, put an extra 2 5mm trukers. It will take 4 to 5 minutes, and do a fixed ratio in a safety way. Maybe less than one. Maybe you will do less than 1.5 meters.
Thank you, Imad. Manuela, can we look at the results of the poll again? So after the debate, people are still leaning to fixed length. Yes. Hello. And compared to fixed ratio. Anybody wants to add anything before we move on to the next question? Okay, Manuela. So our second question is, when performing OAGB, do you alter your BP limb length ratio as per patient BMI, comorbidities, or other variables? Yes, no, or I don't perform OAGB. So our two debaters, meanwhile, are going to start debating what measures ratio do you use when performing OAGB. Are these fixed for all cases, or tailor them per case? Dr. Hazem Al-Momani will lead the discussion on this. Dr. Hazem.
Thank you, Ashraf. Right, looking at the results, it seems that our audience seem to follow the trend that's been discussed today, where that they alter their approach based on the patient's needs. Okay, so moving on, we'll start with Imad. Imad, would you mind talking us through your experience, please?
Okay, sure, Hazem. So let me talk about our practice now. We actually offer bypass only to patients that will accept the long-term follow-up, that will be very compliant to vitamin and minerals, and especially compliant to high protein supplementation and protein concentrated proteins, and especially in the first year until intestinal adaptation. Okay, And we actually do a total bowel length in all our cases, either OAGB or Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. We bypass the proximal 1/3 of the small bowel, but we have to keep an eye about the common limb. So we keep the efferent limb, the common limb, at least more than 4 meters. If the patient has a BMI of over 50, and age is under 50, and he has uncontrolled comorbidities, or in revisional cases, as you know. And if the patient BMI is from 35 to 50, or the age is a bit more than 50, so we keep the common limb at least 4.5 meters or more, and we make actually the gastric pouch a little bit wider so as to give the patient a chance to can consume a considerable amount of proteins, especially in the first year. And also the maximum length of the efferent limb for us is 3.5 meters, whatever the total small bowel length. So can I have a control, Manuela?
Yes, you have it, Emma. Just click on the mouse on the slide.
I'm clicking, it's not moving. So you just move it from your side, it's not moving from my side. Okay, and this is an IFSO consensus statement by Dr. Ramos in 2020, and he actually, when you asked the surgeons that what is the best way to choose the length of the biliopancreatic limb should be based on, 41% of the surgeons, they decided that it should be based on the percent of the total small bowel length. And the second question, that when measurement of the total small bowel length is performed, what is the ideal percentage length of the biliopancreatic limb as a percentage should be? So 68% voted on it should be from 30 to 40%. So can I go to the next slide? It's not moving from my side, Manuel. So let's look at the literature again, and the papers in the literature talking about the percent can be divided into papers like what Dr. Lee published in 2019. He had two groups, one group with tailored limb only without counting the whole small bowel length, and the second group with the same criteria, but he did actually total bowel measurement. He said that, can we come back again? He said that the length of a small bowel was measured to keep, and this is very important, to keep the common channel from 4 meters to 6 meters. And actually the biliopancreatic limb was 150 centimeters for BMI less than 35, and by each one BMI number he give a 10 centimeters extra. So this is the way that he measured the biliary limb according to the patient BMI. And this is actually his result. He had a longer operative time in the second group, where he counted the whole small bowel, and he actually found that they have a similar weight loss in both groups. So next slide. And what was interesting, that in the second group, where he did a total bowel measurement, he had a less anemia and less hypoalbuminemia. So let's go to the next one. He said that measuring the whole length of the bowel will take only a few minutes, as happens with us. And he has the two cases of iatrogenic intestinal perforation that was sutured, and they actually passed uneventful. And in his study, he said that for the first time he demonstrated that maintaining the common channel of at least 4 meters, and this is very logic. If you did the total bowel count and you keep the common channel at least 4 meters, and in our practice now at least 4.5 meters in BMI from 35 to 50, you keep the patient safe. As in our practice, sometimes you have patients with BMI 38, 39, and they have a total bowel count of 6 meters. In these patients, if you did at 2 meters, they will have a higher incidence of malabsorption and malnutrition. So we said that the total bowel count is more safe, because in these patients that have a total bowel length of 6 meters, 6 meters and a half, 5 meters and a half, you will have a shorter biliopancreatic limb, maybe In some cases, we do biliomagnetic limb shorter than 1.5 meters. So you don't just bypass in a blind way. So next slide. Another publication.
Time, please, Dr. Ahmad.
Okay, another publication talking about tailored bypass. This is a very interesting publication by Dr. Carbajo. He actually published more than 1,000 cases for follow-up about 12 years. Next slide. Next slide, please. And he used, should we come back? Should we come back? He used an extra 5 millimeter trookers, only one, like we used 2 5 millimeter trookers. So he didn't have any iatrogenic injury, and he go for a very aggressive bypass. He bypassed in the mid portion of the small bowel, and he actually add about 50 centimeters in higher BMIs. So next slide. Next, please. And he found that after 12 years, the patient is keeping a perfect weight loss, and they have about 0% hypoalbuminemia after 12 years, after 10 years. So next slide, please. And he said that the malnutrition was temporary, and once the intestinal adaptation is reached, they have no problem, because he has a strict follow-up program, as we do. We have strict follow-up programs, we have questionnaires, we have Google Forms, we send it regularly to our patients. We insist that the patient should be strict to their minerals, follow-up lab. They should take the concentrated proteins. If you did this in the first year, you will have a very low rate of malnutrition. So next slide. Another publication by Dr. Carbajo, it has the same result, so I will skip it for time reason, and it has the same result. So next. Oh, I finished actually. So I finished, Ashraf.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad.
Thank you,
Abu Zaid, the floor is yours.
Right.
Abu Zaid, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes,
All
we
right.
can hear you, Abu Zaid.
Right. I'm sorry, I am having terrible connection in the house. Yes, okay. I'm having terrible connection in the house. I'll try to be fast. Okay. In response to I don't have any reason now to make more measures to my patient. And regarding the second question, I was for a while. I use 150 centimeters for my metabolic procedures, like my I use 180 centimeters standard for all my patients. I use super with 2 meters, and this is enough for the procedure. I'm doing a simple procedure. I'm doing a procedure that has a small pouch, and then I do my anastomosis, 150 do my 180 all in IBMI. This is standardized because we need to standardize my procedure. We make it safe and we make my outcome.
Dr. Muhammad,
can be
Dr. Muhammad,
Dr. Kamal
Dr. Muhammad, Dr. Abu Zaid, Dr. Abu Zaid, we can't hear you well. I'm sorry about this, guys. It seems that Professor Abu Zaid is having problems with his signal. So if you don't mind, I'll.
Sorry.
Manuela, can we mute Professor Abu Zaid, please? If you don't mind, guys, I'll ask a few questions to our panelists while we're waiting for Professor Abu Zaid to join us again. Dr. Haytham.
Yeah.
Can you please talk us through your logic when approaching a case, what measurements you do, and what is it that you can alter or what factors will affect your decisions to alter your routine? Let's put it this way.
Listen, Hazim, you know that even in gastric bypass, the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, which is 55 years old, till now, we don't have a real fixed BP limb or common channel that we know that we can rely on. And I think it is the same here in non-anastomosis gastric bypass. Sometimes it is the surgeon's preference. I think this is level 4 evidence. And when we're talking till now, and we have some good publications, but we're talking about experience rather than real good prospective studies. So what I'm doing now is, when I started to do the one anastomosis, we used to do 2 meters for all patients and 2.5 meters for revision and for high BMI. And then we start to have our cases of either malnutrition or hepatic failure or these complications of steatorrhea. And synchronously with that, we have the publications of Kamal, of Jean-Marc Chevalier, that showed that probably having a shorter BP limb will have probably the same outcome with less complications. And this is where 3 years ago, I started to do 150, 180 centimeters for BMI below 40. And I don't go beyond that, especially in females, because most of the nutritional problems happens with the females. And for males, the maximum I can get is 200 meters for BMI 50 or for revisions, and 180 for primaries. In cases of revisions, I may take the total small bowel length and I measure 2/3, 1/3. This is a new approach that I started 6 months ago. So basically, if you ask me, Hazem, do you have an evidence behind this? It is not really a clear evidence for me, but we have the publications of, as I said, our gentlemen and the gentlewomen we have in terms of the BPLM. And I'm trying to stick to this. And after having this, I don't have till now a single case of either hepatic failure or a nutritional maldeficiency or reversal.
Sonia, what's your take on this question, please?
Yeah, can you hear?
Sorry now. I have to say, one important thing also to discuss about is the risk of MGB reversal, because I did Kermansabi systematic review now on MGB reversal. We published a few weeks ago in SWORD, and the problem is that with a mean of 200 centimeters, there was 1% of patients who needed reversal, and there were complications of about 10% perioperative complications. And this is really important to think about. And I have to say, another important thing is also that this is how I do it when I see my patients. I have to decide if it's a good MGB or RGB patient, because they have to be compliant. That means that they have to come to the follow-up. They need laboratory, and if there are deficiencies, they have to supplement. And I think this is really an important decision when you can't follow up your patients. I agree totally with Kamal that maybe you have to exclude really only 1 meter of BP limb, but when you can follow up them, in my opinion, the fixed length of 180 centimeters is quite safe. This is not evidence, but my opinion. But we have to really think about also the complications of reversal of MGB.
Sorry, can I speak again?
Yes, Abu Zaid, we're really sorry to have cut you short. We can hear you really well now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix the network problem because I have a very terrible problem in the hospital. I wasn't supposed to be in the hospital today. I had my holiday today, but no problem. All right. Okay. So I was speaking about the answer of the second question, that when I use the fixed meters, fixed length, I use 150 for my diabetic low BMI. I use 180 for all my patients, and I use 2 meters for the super obese. Okay. Since I used this kind of fixed lengths, I didn't have any problem with nutrition. I didn't have any problem with the weight loss. The point is that after analyzing the we found who lost without having food that he had, with malnutrition due to bile, and they can't eat well protein. They had deterioration and hypoproteinemia. So put all the disaster of malnutrition on the long day, because even if you short out, you still have very bad nutrition. On the other side, patients who had less weight loss than other patients, when we revive these patients, we found that if you give them high protein food with healthy food, you will have very good weight loss results. So I don't think that there is any kind of till now any evidence-based medicine to support to use 3 meters or 4 meters in patients, even if they have 9 meters of intestine, which is very rare case. If we use the other slides, I don't think we have the slides already. I'll try to move fast in the slides. Okay, so this is how we count the intestine. Okay. And here's the number. Okay, and I'll just show 17 of them have deficiency hypopenia, along with vitamin and trace element deficiency. And you get good thought. They have marvelous results with weight loss. Okay. I'm just trying to move these slides. It's fixed. Okay. Does it move? Okay. It's time to. Okay. So till the slides move again. So to conclude the second question, because I missed the second question, we use of standards and centers all over the world who is doing Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, and nobody doing Roux-en-Y gastric bypass measured the whole length of the intestine. Thank you. I will let you speak now.
Abu Zaid, I'm really disappointed we didn't get to hear you really well. I was looking forward to hearing your reply.
I finished.
Right. Dr. Mirza, Dr. Imad had kindly told us some of his factors that he takes into consideration when he alters his ratio. He talked about the age, he talked about the sex, he talked about the BMI. Would you mind telling us your approach, please, and how is it that you alter your approach as per your cases?
Yes, as I told you, there is a very important factor, male and female, different response. The size of the pouch, as we know, that the size of the pouch is an important factor, almost is standard now. And the stoma, it is a standard now, we are using 3 centimeter, and the side of the pouch, almost most of the surgeon there, it is standardized. The only difference is the limb. The limb is the most important factor, is the common limb in weight loss and complication and absorption. So this is the common limb, which some people, they say the biliary limb, how much we exclude. So the common limb is the most important. It's the other way around is the length of excluded biliary limb. Garcia, he was, as you know, you remember him, he's a very famous bariatric surgeon from Malaga. He used to start to do gastric, single aneurysmal gastric bypass, and unfortunately he died a few years back. When he started, we suggest the idea of starting measuring the limb from the ileocecal, and we make 3 meter common limb, and we exclude the rest, like what we do in the biliopancreatic diversion. He did few cases and revised all of them because severe metabolic complication and severe weight loss, excess weight loss. So he changed his idea. He used to do 3 and 3.5 meter common limb by starting from the ileocecal. So he regret and he reversed all the cases, and he start again to from upper part, he exclude 2 meter. So again, here in our area, Middle East is different than other area. We have to know our culture, our behavior, our eating habit, our exercise is totally different. So we have to consider male is different. So we have to consider all. We find a lot of complication, metabolic complication, male, female more severe than male. But weight loss or inadequate weight loss or weight regain in single anosmosis is not an issue in our area, the only metabolic complication. So this is why we differentiate between male and female. For metabolic surgery, diabetes, we go for 150, as I said. We don't have a lot of complication. There is no much metabolic complication as published, and we know that. But for BMI up to 50, male is female different, 160 and 170. Male is 170 and one female. Try to be very cautious, maximum 160, and their response to weight loss is good. For super or severe obesity, more than 50, we go to 200, not more. For revisional surgery also, we go, and we never go beyond 200 because we have a lot of metabolic complication with more than 200. So this is our approach. We have to consider it in our area. I'm sure it may be not possible in the other different parts of the world, but we have to consider this in our area, all the factors, including the sex, male and female. So this is our standard in our center.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza. Dr. Kamal, I'm going to give you a curveball here because Dr. Mirza touched on a topic that I've noticed. I was quite lucky to have worked in the UK before moving to the Middle East, and I did notice a change in the behavior following bariatric surgery based on the cultural and ethnicity background. Is this something that you notice and you will take into account? So for me, for example, in the Middle East, our diet doesn't rely on processed food. Its portions are big and the portions seems to be quite heavy. And I find that the people's response to surgery is not the same, and we need to be more aggressive here in the Middle East compared to it is in the West. Is it something that you've noticed in your practice, and is it something that you take into account?
So, Hazem, thank you very much. It's an interesting question, and I hear Dr. Gary loud and clear, with regards to differences in population and all. So the short answer is no, but I will elaborate that. The important thing to understand here is that I think our nomenclatures with bariatric surgery are somewhat misplaced. We call our procedures restrictive and malabsorptive, and we know from evidence that gastric bypass does not depend on malabsorption for its effects. We know that from data from Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. One anastomosis, we don't really have much data, but then it's the gastric bypass, and it is the same. And whenever you start relying on malabsorption as a mechanism of action, history of bariatric surgery tells us that we will harm patients, and that procedure will sooner or later be abandoned by the community. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it is a misconception again that the outcomes of a gastric bypass are in proportion to the length of the biliopancreatic limb, because it is not. We know from Mason's loop gastric bypass, because Mason only bypassed 40 centimeters or 50 centimeters of BP limb. He used 15 or 16 inches, he described as. We know from Roux-en-Y gastric bypass the same thing. So bypassing only 50-60 centimeters of BP limb gives you all the benefits of gastric bypass. It is, I think in my view, it is a mistake to assume that you need to bypass more for better effect. You don't, because when you bypass more than any fixed length, let's say 150, for example, which is what we're doing, you're not gaining anything in terms of weight loss or metabolic outcomes. All you're doing is you're increasing the protein calorie malnutrition rates. That is the second point. The third point I want to make out is my colleague here said, Mohammed said, that he was very surprised that patients had weight regain, but they still had micronutrient deficiencies. He shouldn't be surprised, because gastric bypass, the micronutrient deficiencies are happening due to a different mechanism of action. When you bypass duodenum and the proximal jejunum, you will see micronutrient deficiencies regardless of whether patient is losing weight or not losing weight. The moment you do a bypass, you are bypassing duodenum and proximal jejunum, your patient will then become deficient in iron and calcium, because that is where the predominant sites of absorption are. So we don't need to be surprised. Even if patients don't lose weight, they're able to absorb all the calories. That means, and I think I would rephrase that, they are always able to absorb most of the calories that you consume anyway. The reason our bariatric operations work is because patients are consuming fewer calories, not because they're not able to absorb all the calories that are consumed. So with these thoughts, I would say that history of OAGB has been different to Roux-en-Y. In those days, we did not know that the alimentary limb does not add to any weight loss outcomes. So Dr. Rutledge and colleagues like him, they just added the Roux-en-Y and biliopancreatic limb, and they made it up to 2 meters, and that's how they started doing it. If one anastomosis was invented today, and we now know that Roux limb does not do anything to weight loss, people would start off with 50 centimeters, and then we would be in a totally different place. You see, so we have gone the other way. We've started off with 2, and I'm now trying to bring it down to slowly to 1 meters and even less. So at the moment, I'm doing 150 regularly for all my patients. I do not differentiate with race with regards to any background or anything at all, because most of our patients are similar and eating habits are similar. And as I said, malabsorption is not a mechanism of action that I rely on. So I don't give more or less malabsorption to people depending on their racial characteristics. But in the future, I think we should study 100 centimeters as BP limb. And my suspicion is that even that will not reduce the weight loss outcomes, but it will improve the nutritional outcomes significantly. With these thoughts, Hazim, I would have to leave you, my friend, and all of you, because I have another meeting to go to. So thank you very much for having me. And I'm on.
Dr. Kamal, we're really honored and privileged for you to have spared us this precious time of yours. Thank you very much for joining us, and I'll see you around soon.
You will, and thank you. The honor is all mine. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Kamal.
Thank you. Right. Ashraf, is there anything or any comments that you would like to add?
Yes. Sorry. So two quick comments. A group from Egypt, Nabil et al., published a proximal versus distal OAGB, and they went really distal. They just counted 400 from the ileocecal valve, it was an RCT, versus 200 from the ligament of Treitz. And there was no difference in weight loss, just to reiterate what Dr. Mahawar said. Dr. Mahawar also said that we need to know the common channel. If we look at the OAGB survey, we collected data about 270 revisions for malnutrition. Offering 200 centimeter BP limb left an average common channel of 327 centimeters only. So if you offer this fixed BP limb, people who are ending up with revisions are having only 327 centimeters. That's it, Hazem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf. Okay, let's go back to the polls again. I mean, it will be an unfair poll because Professor Abuzed didn't have the chance to fight his case. So when performing the one anastomosis bypass, do you alter your BP limb according to the patient's variables? Yes or no?
Yes.
Can we have the results, please? Brilliant. So it's pretty much the same, that everyone seems to tailor their measurements as per their patient's needs. Okay, well, as we're running late with time, let's move on to question number 3. So, and this is a question for both Imad and Abuzed. If you don't mind, Imad, we'll get you to take control this time, okay?
Okay.
So the question to the audience is, do you follow this technique for all of your cases, or if you consider using either technique, will you do it or no? And what will make you take that decision? So will you change your fixed ratio to a fixed length or vice versa? And we'll ask the same questions to our debaters, Imad and Abu Zaid, please.
Yeah, can I start first?
So
because I'm not sure that I will have more time with the connection. So
yeah.
we are having difficult time with the connection here in the hospital. Okay, so I'll start.
No
if you can
problem.
hear.
Let's just get the answers first, and then the mic is yours.
Hazem,
Okay, all right.
Meanwhile, we missed one comment from the floor from Dr. Mal Fobi. He's saying that increasing the BP limb does increase both weight loss and complications. We know Dr. Mahawar said doesn't necessarily does it. We have publications that doesn't do it, but maybe at the end we can hear the comments of our panelists regarding that. Does increasing the BP limb increases the weight loss?
Fair enough. So 40% of the audience do change, and about a third don't change it. Okay, Abu Zaid, the mic is yours.
Okay, regarding the third question, would you consider changing? We are always changing our techniques. We are not that all the time following the guidelines and following the outcome of the patient to have more and more malleability to change our technique. What we are having right now is that we do redo cases, a lot of redo cases right now. And in the redo cases, they are different categories. Redo cases after band or after sleeve who are just didn't lose weight because they had bad procedure from the start, or they had good procedure from the start, but they didn't use it well. So in these kind of patients, we still use fixed limb 2 meters, because I know that after 4 or 5 years of following up these kind of patients, it didn't matter how much of the intestine left. I still do the 2 meters. I don't exceed. Why? Because as we spoke in the first two questions, when I use more than 2 meters, I have more malnutrition. I don't have excess weight loss. It's usually combined. So the problem about redo cases that some surgeons leave the pouch big, and they will say that I will depend on the malabsorption. And this proved to us on the long term that we need to do restriction. So it's combined. You have to restrict, you have to have a long, narrow pouch with small anastomosis. Still the same concept. So I'm changing all the time. If the patient is coming to me after mini gastric bypass or one atherosclerotic gastric bypass with deficient weight loss or weight satisfaction, and I have all the criteria normal, I can go inside and count the whole intestine and bypass more 1 meter. But I know that when I'm doing that, it's big. I have to resize my pouch again. We are using a very in our hands, which we have a small anastomosis and for our patients. Okay. I finished. Yeah, this slide is very nice, Manuela, but it's working alone. Here, Ahmed, you can speak. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, can you give me the control, Manuela? I just clicked on the mouse. Okay, it's working. Okay. So the last question, if I will consider performing a standard limb, so yes, I will consider doing this in certain situation. If the patient refused other options, because I actually consent my patient for both operations, especially if the patient was very heavy, if he has a lot of adhesions, he has an exploration before, or I suspect that he has massive adhesions. So I will consent my patient before the operation that I may shift to another operation. But if the patient refused, he insisted on a bypass, so and I went inside, I couldn't count the whole small bowel, so I will bypass only 1 meter and 50 centimeters to be in the safe area. I will not go for 2 meters. Because I'm totally convinced that more than 1.5 meter will expose the patient to a risk of malnutrition, especially if the total bowel length is less than 6 meters. And let's go back to the literature, and this is Dr. Lee. And if you have a look at his large cohort, he find, as we see, about 10% of his cases were less than 6 meter. 10% were less than 6 meter total bowel length. So this means if you did a fixed bypass for this patient of 2 meters and they have say 5 meter total small bowel length, this means that they will have a 3 meter common limb and they will be very exposed to malnutrition. So we are very convinced that total bowel length doesn't mean that you will bypass a very long part of the small bowel. It means that you will be very safe. You sometimes maybe in 10 or 15% of your patient you will bypass less than 2 meters. Maybe in some cases we bypass 1 meter and 30 centimeters. And as Dr. Lee said, that if he had used the fixed 2 meters pediopancreatic limb, the common channel would be less than 4 meters in 10% of his cases. And if he used 2.5 meters, this means that about quarter of his patients will have less than 4 meters common channel and they will be exposed to malnutrition. And this is another interesting article by Dr. Kamal. He compared both groups of 150 meters and 2 meters, and interestingly, in his study, he found that OAGB with 1.5 meter was also associated with nutritional issues in large number of patients, and this has led to rethink of the supplementation protocol. He's thinking about to make the supplementation protocol more intense, especially in the first year where the patient where intestinal adaptation is still happening, or he still thinking about reducing the BP limb less than 1.5 meters. And this is actually what make us think about that the most of total bowel count, especially if you have about 10 to 15% of your patients with total bowel length less than 6 meters. Especially the problem will be more evident if you have a patient with a BMI of 35 to 50 with a total bowel count less than 6 meters, and you go with bypass of more than 1.5 meters. There is a high incidence of malnutrition, and through our experience, we had converted only one case. And this case where we did a total bowel count and we did a fixed 2 meters for this patient. In this patient, he had a total bowel count of 6.2 meters, and we actually bypassed the 2 meters, and she had the malabsorption. So fixed 2 meters is not logics. If you want to be safe, if I had to do a fixed bypass, I will do 1.5 meters. And if we look again to the literature, we have this interesting paper from Italy. They compared 3 groups, 2 meters versus 180 and 150. And they found that the excess weight loss was similar, but the vitamin deficiency and the hypoalbuminemia was much less in the group with 150. So they concluded that a BPL with 150 or 180 is safe and effective in terms of excess weight loss and comorbidity improvement, but with minimal malnutrition, even BMI over 50. And I don't really agree totally with the BMI over 50, because if you do it, if you didn't do a total bowel count and you have the reverse, you have a patient with a BMI over 50 and they have a very long small bowel, say they have 10 or 11 meters of a small bowel, and you do a fixed 150, in our experience, we didn't found a proper weight loss for these patients. They didn't have a good weight loss, and in some cases we have to go in again and to re-lengthen the periopancreatic limb, and they have a better weight loss without evident malnutrition.
Almost
paper, I'm about to finish, and another paper comparing two groups also, I'm about to finish. And they found that 160 is much better than 2 meters. So a lot of papers in the literature are talking about less than 2 meters if you are going to do a fixed limb without total bowel count. So this is the situation. 150 ppl length will be very adequate if I'm not going to do a total bowel count, especially in patients with BMI less than 50, in a female with diabetes or comorbidities, especially type 1 diabetes, that will because these patients are actually very pretty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imad. Now, question to the rest of our panelists. We'll start with Dr. Haytham Fawad. Let's say that you were doing an OAGB and you found that the patient has 4 meters of small bowel, Dr. Haytham. What would you do?
Then I will do the 1/3, 2/3, although I'm not doing the total bowel length as I mentioned before. So I would go for 1.5, 2.5, or 1.25, 2.75 meters of BP limb. If it is shorter, probably, which is very, very rare, I didn't have at any time this short bowel length, then probably I would consent the patient to do a sleeve gastrectomy, not to go for a bypass procedure. And this is why you remember, Ashraf, we discussed before in a session the consent with the patients, that every patient who is going to do bariatric surgery, he should be consented for either, if he go for a bypass, we should tell him that probably will not be able to do a bypass and will do a sleeve, and vice versa. So this is something very important, I believe, to consent patient for both procedures and at any time.
Excellent, thank you, Dr. Chiappetta. Sonia, you published about comparing your OAGB and Roux gastric bypass results. So 2 questions. First, if we do the 4 meters, or if you go in and you find that the patient has 4 meters, what would you do? Would you cross over to a Roux gastric bypass, hoping that the ruling provide us with some absorption? And the second question, can you please tell us what do you do with your BP limb in the Roux and the OAGB in that paper that you published, and how would altering the BP limbs would alter the results?
Okay, first question. I have to say, in a patient with 400 centimeters, I would perform an MGB with a BP limb of 100 centimeters to leave a minimum of 3 meters of common channel. Obviously, like Hassan Fawad said, you can also discuss to do sleeve gastrectomy, but in this case, it depends on the patient. If he has a metabolic syndrome, I think he has more. It would be better to perform MGB. The second question is the paper I published was to compare MGB versus Roux gastric bypass after failed sleeve gastrectomy. And I think because the data has shown that MGB was better regarding weight loss. We had the fixed limb length of 200 centimeters of biliopancreatic limb, and we had in Roux gastric bypass 150 centimeter of alimentary limb and 50 centimeter of biliopancreatic limb. So the standard measurement. After this paper, I have to say, in my practice, when I have to perform revisional bariatric surgery after failed sleeve gastrectomy due to weight regain, I control the upper endoscopy. If upper endoscopy has the esophagitis C or D, I perform rural gastric bypass, but with a longer biliopancreatic limb, because yes, my data has shown that the standard limb length did not perform for the weight loss, and there are also other publications from Chetan Parma that womb-wide gastric bypass after sleeve gastrectomy is more efficient for the reflux. So for me, it's important, a patient with weight regain after sleeve gastrectomy, how is upper endoscopy? If there's no esophagitis or A and B, I perform MGB. And if there is esophagitis C and D, I perform womb-wide gastric bypass, but with a longer biliopancreatic limb.
Excellent, thank you. Actually, I do the same, longer BP limb Roux-en-Y for reflux and weight regain after sleeve. And as much as it's going to make Dr. Haitham Fawal happy to hear, we did publish patients who come to our institution from other institutions, malnutrition, liver failure after OAGB requiring TPN, etc. And a couple of months ago, I received another patient who had a long BP limb Roux-en-Y, actually, Haitham, at another institution, who behaved similarly to the OAGB patient. And once explored, that patient had 200 centimeter BP limb. So I guess once we go more and more with these BP limbs, regardless of the configuration, we're just gonna face these consequences. But
can I ask meters out of how the total length of this patient was how much?
So a 200 centimeter, a 120 Roux, 130 Roux, and 200 centimeter BP left that patient with 300 centimeter common channel. So even having an alimentary limb of, or a total alimentary limb of 430, put her at an albumin of 1.4. I try to measure the, if I'm going to do a long BP limb, I try to measure the whole length of the small bowel. Thank you, Dr. Chiappetta, for sharing your experience. Dr. Khalid Mirza, do you think lengthening the BPL indefinitely will give us better and better weight loss outcome, or it stops at some point?
Yes, because if you, from all the studies, many studies show that biliary limb longer than 200, you will give excess weight loss, but also complication. This is we get it from our experience from Scopenaro, biliopancreatic divergence, Scopenaro. Once we play with the biliary limb, common limb, and the alimentary limb, the outcome will be different, and the weight loss is totally different. In spite you have big stomach, but when you play with this limb, so from that history of BBD, we know how the outcome. In single anastomosis gastric bypass, almost the same. You have a small pouch standard, but biliary limb more than 200, you will have more weight loss, but severe metabolic complication. This is why in our institute, we never go beyond 200. Even the weight loss will take longer time to, even the high BMI with 200, it will take longer time to get a good weight loss, but it's better than rapid weight loss and metabolic complication. So biliary limb is very important in weight loss. I don't know our colleagues, they just mentioned there is no effect in weight loss by the biliary limb, but in our culture and patient, we find the biliary limb plays a major role in weight loss in these patients and metabolic complication.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Mirza. I'm going to leave my colleague Hazem to give his final comments and closing remarks. And meanwhile, Manuela, you could run that poll again. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ashraf. I'm sure Abu Zaid is a bit gutted. I'm very certain he had a a very strong argument, but IT failed him, unfortunately. Imad, thank you very much. You had a very insightful.
I'm trying to speak. If you can hear me, just
Yes, yes. I'm saying, Imad, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Lots of evidence to support your argument. We're really, really most grateful. I have one question to all the panelists. So in one sentence, Haytham, would you go for a fixed rate or fixed ratio or fixed length?
Fixed length, definitely.
Sonia?
Fixed length also.
And Dr. Mirza?
What will be the length, Hazim?
Yes, fixed
We'll
length.
come fixed length. Right, let's take Ahmad's question then. What length? Range?
As
Haytham?
was published in the literature, 150, 180 is good for primary, and probably 180 to 100 for revisions. These are the main BP length we are doing nowadays.
Okay, Sonia, what are your thoughts?
I agree. 150, 180 in primary surgery and 200 centimeters in revisional bariatric surgery, or if BMI with visceral fat is important.
And Dr. Mirza?
Yes, for the primary, 150 metabolic and up to 180, depending the BMI. This is fixed 150 to 180. For super obese, above 50 to 200, not more than 200, even in the revision.
Can you hear me right now?
Fixed.
Yes, yes.
Hazim, can you hear
Thank
me
you,
right
Dr.
now?
Mirza. Yes,
Okay.
Abu we can.
Yes. All right.
Well,
I'll try to speak fast. But if you don't hear me, just raise your hand and tell me I'm not hearing you, okay? Because sometimes I'm speaking and you don't hear me. Okay, so to summarize what I was saying, because I didn't have much time today with this bad network in the hospital, I would say that for us right now, after 5 years of revising our technique, we from 2016 till now, we use 150 for low BMI, 180 for the standard procedures, and 200 for redo and for the super obese patients. Till now, we don't have the single case that we saw before of malnutrition that needs revision for normal anatomy. Till now, we have very satisfactory excess weight loss in our patients. We usually measure our results per 1,000 case. So till now, we are having very, very satisfactory results. We won't change our technique except if there is evidence-based medicine that we need in Roux-en-Y and in mini gastric bypass to count the whole bowel length. For me, I do the sleeve according to the configuration of the stomach, and I do a nice sleeve in my opinion. I don't count the whole stomach and then cut 75% whatever the size of the stomach. Some stomachs are big, they have balloons inside, and you have to cut more than 75% to leave more than or the same as you leave in normal person. So having a fixed ratio from the intestine, in my opinion, till now, I don't really need to put another 2 trokers to count the whole intestine to make the same technique that I will make even if the patient has 8 meters of length. Even if my patient, the super obese patient, has 8 meters of intestine, I'll still do the 2 meters. I won't exceed it because I didn't see any benefit from exceeding the 2 meters. I wish I said what I need to say.
But I think 2 meters is sometimes it can be catastrophic in about 10% of your patients.
Yeah, Ahmad, I think from today's chat we could see that the controversy is always going to be there in bariatrics. We all agree that the one anastomosis bypass is a very potent operation, is a very effective metabolic surgery. Any operation success will depend on the skills, the patient selection, and the follow-up of the operator. In your hands, Ahmad, you seem to be doing a great job. I congratulate you, and I encourage you to continue. For all of these hearing us, if you decide to follow Dr. Ahmad's approach, you need to do it the way he does it. He seems to have good follow-up, good connections with his patients to make sure he keeps track of his progress. I think we'll call it a wrap. I think we've overdone it with time. It's been very insightful. It's been a challenging debate, to be honest, with the IT and the times. I thank you all. Thanks to Dr. Mirza for joining us today from Italy. Sonia, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure meeting you. Dr. Haitham, as always, you always brighten our meetings. Thank you very much. Imad, great opportunity to have met you. And Abu Zaid, thank you very much. Towards the end of this webinar, I'd like once again to thank our sponsors, Easy Surge. Thank you very much all. Hope to see you all soon. All the very best. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.